I never thought I'd be the kind of guy telling a story like this. I used to scroll through posts online, reading about people's messy relationships and thinking, that could never happen to me. I guess life has a way of proving you wrong when you least expect it. My name's Elliot. I'm 38 years old, married to Keith. Yes, that's her name for the past 12 years. We've got 2 boys, ages 9 and 6. On the outside, we looked like the perfect family. House in the suburbs, soccer games on weekends, family dinners every night. But if I'm honest, the cracks started showing long before I found out the truth. At first, it was little things. Keith started staying late at work more often. Deadlines, she'd say. She got secretive with her phone, always tilting the screen away when I walked by. The intimacy between us started fading. Not just the sex though, that, too, but the small touches, the way she used to look at me like I was the only man in the world. That look was gone. I told myself it was just the stress of raising kids and balancing careers. Keith works in marketing, and her job's always been demanding. But something in my gut told me there was more to it. You know how people say to trust your instincts? Yeah. I should have listened to mine a lot sooner. Looking back, there were signs I brushed aside. The way she'd get defensive if I asked about her day. The sudden, almost obsessive attention to her appearance, new clothes, makeup, perfume she'd never worn before. And then there was Herman. Her stepbrother, Herman, had always been around. They didn't grow up together, so I never thought much of their closeness. But there were moments that made me pause. The way they'd laugh together, how she'd light up when he walked into the room. Still, I told myself it was harmless. After all, they were family. God, how wrong I was. The night I found out started like any other. It was a Thursday soccer practice night for our oldest. I took both boys to the field while Keith stayed home, claiming she needed to catch up on work emails. I didn't think twice about it. Practice ran late, so by the time we got home, it was close to 9 p.m. The house was dark, except for the faint glow coming from under the bedroom door. The boys kicked off their cleats and ran upstairs to get ready for bed while I headed to our room. I didn't knock. Why would I? It was my bedroom. But the second I opened the door, something felt off. Keith was sitting on the edge of the bed, phone clutched tightly in both hands. Her eyes darted up to mine, wide and startled, like a kid caught with their hand in the cookie jar. Hey, I said slowly, stepping inside. Everything okay? Yeah. Just, work stuff. She forced a smile and tilted her phone screen away, locking it with a quick tap of her thumb. My stomach twisted. I didn't say anything, just moved to the closet to hang up my jacket. But the air in the room had shifted thick with something unspoken. I could feel her eyes on me, watching, waiting. I don't know what made me do it. Call it intuition or maybe just a moment of clarity. But as I turned back toward her, I asked the question that had been simmering in the back of my mind for months: who were you texting just now? Her smile faltered. No one. Just a coworker. Which one? She hesitated, just for a second, but long enough to set my nerves on edge. Sarah, she said quickly. We're working on the Henderson campaign. I nodded slowly, pretending to buy it. But my gut told me she was lying. I didn't push, though. Not yet. Instead, I waited until she went to take a shower. The moment I heard the water running, I grabbed her phone from the nightstand. Locked, of course. But I knew her passcode. It was our wedding anniversary. Or at least, it used to be. I tried the date. Wrong. Tried the kids' birthdays. Wrong again. My hands were sweating as I stared at the screen, and then, on a hunch, I typed in Herman's birthday. The phone unlocked. My heart hammered in my chest as I scrolled through her messages. Most were harmless chats with friends, work emails. But then I found the thread with him. Herman. I almost dropped the phone. The texts weren't even subtle. Flirty comments, inside jokes I didn't understand. And then, as I scrolled further, my breath caught in my throat. Last night was incredible. I can still feel your hands on me. I can't stop thinking about the way you kissed me in the car. I wish I could be with you right now. I need you again. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I read the messages over and over, praying I'd misunderstood. But there was no mistaking the meaning that my wife was having sex with her stepbrother, and judging by the timestamps, it had been going on for months. I stood there, phone clutched in my hand, unable to move. My chest felt tight, like someone had reached inside and squeezed the air from my lungs. The words on the screen blurred as my mind tried to make sense of what I'd just read. Herman. Of all people that I wanted to scream, to punch a hole in the wall, to wake Keith up right then and there and demand answers. But my son's laughter drifted from down the hall, a reminder that I couldn't lose control. Not now. I set the phone back on the nightstand, my hands trembling. The sound of the shower still echoed from the bathroom. I had a few minutes to think. My mind raced, memories flashing like broken glass. The way Keith used to brush off Herman's visits, calling him family. The way she'd hug him a little too long, laugh a little too hard at his jokes. All the signs I'd ignored suddenly clicked into place. I backed out of the bedroom and made my way down the hall to check on the boys. They were already tucked into bed, their eyes heavy with sleep. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them. Their steady breathing was the only thing keeping me grounded. The bathroom door creaked open. Keith stepped out, towel wrapped around her body, her damp hair clinging to her shoulders. She froze when she saw me standing by the door. Elliot? What are you doing? I swallowed hard, my pulse thudding in my ears. Couldn't sleep, I lied. My voice sounded hollow. Her eyes flicked to the nightstand, where her phone lay untouched. If she suspected anything, she didn't show it. Instead, she offered a small smile, the kind that used to melt my heart. Now, it made my stomach turn. Come to bed, she said softly, stepping past me into the room. I stood there for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. Confronting her now would wake the kids. I needed time to process, to figure out what to say. But the weight of what I knew was suffocating. I followed her into the bedroom, my steps heavy as lead. She slipped beneath the covers and patted the space beside her. I hesitated, then sat on the edge of the bed, my back to her. Is something wrong? She asked, her voice laced with concern. For a moment, I almost told her. The words hovered on the tip of my tongue. I know. I know what you've done. But the image of my sons flashed in my mind again, and I swallowed the words. Not tonight. Not yet. Instead, I forced myself to lie down beside her. Her body shifted closer, her hand resting lightly on my chest. I fought the urge to pull away. As the room fell into silence, my thoughts screamed louder than ever. I stared at the ceiling, knowing that this was only the beginning. The truth had shattered my world, but the confrontation would be the real storm, and when it came, there would be no turning back. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay stiff beside Keith, her breathing slow and steady as if she hadn't just torn my world apart. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those messages. Last night was incredible. The words replayed in my head like a broken record. By the time the sun rose, I'd made a decision. I needed proof. Hard evidence that she couldn't deny. The texts were enough for me, but I knew Keith. She was a master of twisting words until you doubted your own thoughts. I couldn't give her that chance. I got up before she did, careful not to wake her. After getting the boys ready for school, I watched as Keith came downstairs, her smile as bright and fake as ever. Morning, she chirped, brushing a kiss against my cheek like nothing had changed. Morning, I replied, my voice flat. She didn't seem to notice. As the boys scrambled to put on their shoes, Keith busied herself in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone between sips of coffee. My eyes stayed glued to her every move. When she wasn't looking, I grabbed her phone charger from the counter and slipped it into my pocket. I had a plan. Once Keith left for work and the boys were at school, I returned home and got to work. I'd always been good with tech, and it didn't take long to find a data recovery app that could pull deleted messages from a phone. I tested it on my own phone first to make sure it worked. It did. Now, all I needed was access to Keith's phone again. That night, I waited until she fell asleep. My heart pounded as I carefully slid her phone from her nightstand. The screen lit up, reflecting her sleeping face in the soft glow. For a moment, I hesitated. This felt wrong, like a betrayal of trust. But then I remembered the messages. Herman. And suddenly, any guilt I felt vanished. That I plugged her phone into my laptop and ran the program. It took longer than I expected, each minute dragging out like an eternity. Finally, the data appeared. My eyes scanned the recovered messages, and my stomach twisted with each word. I can't wait until Friday. Same place? You drive me crazy. I need you so bad. God, the way you touched me in the kitchen. I thought we were gonna get caught. My hands clenched into fists. The kitchen. In my house. While our kids were home, scrolling further, I found something that stopped me cold. A picture. Keith, lying on a hotel bed, wearing nothing but a thin sheet draped across her hips. Her smile was sultry, her eyes half-lidded with desire. And the caption beneath it, counting down the days until I can feel you inside me again. My vision blurred as rage and heartbreak collided in my chest. I slammed the laptop shut and gripped the edge of the desk, struggling to steady my breathing. Every fiber of my being screamed to wake her up and confront her right then and there. But I forced myself to stop. That I needed more proof of where they met. Dates, locations, anything she couldn't explain away. As I stood there, pulse hammering in my ears, one thing became painfully clear: this wasn't just an affair. It was a twisted, ongoing betrayal right under my nose. And I was going to expose every last bit of it. The next few days were a blur of forced smiles and suppressed rage. Every glance Keith threw my way, every brush of her hand against mine, it all felt like poison beneath my skin. Yet, I kept my mask firmly in place. I had to. I became a shadow in my own home, observing everything. The way Keith clutched her phone like a lifeline, how she'd disappear into the bathroom for longer than necessary, and the faint smile that would linger on her lips after she read a message. I started noting her schedule: when she left for work, when she claimed to have girls' nights or team dinners. I needed patterns, dates that I could cross-reference with the texts I'd found. Then, an opportunity fell into my lap. Friday night, Keith announced she had to stay late at the office again. My pulse spiked, but I forced myself to appear indifferent. Another deadline? I asked, keeping my tone casual. Yeah, the Henderson campaign, she replied without hesitation, turning back to the mirror as she applied an extra coat of mascara. Too much effort for a late-night work session. Don't wait up, she added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I nodded and kissed her cheek, fighting the urge to recoil. The moment the door closed behind her, I sprang into action. The boys were settled with a movie, giving me enough time to do what I needed. I grabbed the GPS tracker I'd bought earlier that week, a small device no larger than a matchbox, and slipped outside. Keith's car sat in the driveway, gleaming under the porch light. I crouched beside the rear bumper and carefully attached the tracker beneath it, securing it out of sight. My heart pounded as I stepped back, adrenaline mixing with anticipation. Back inside, I pulled up the tracking app on my phone. The device was active, sending real-time updates of the car's location. Now, all I had to do was wait. Hours ticked by slowly. The boys eventually fell asleep, leaving the house cloaked in silence. I sat on the edge of the couch, phone in hand, watching the blinking dot move across the map. 10:07 p.m. The car left the city center, veering toward the outskirts. 10:35 p.m. It stopped near a hotel just off the highway. Not exactly a typical office location. My breath caught in my throat as I zoomed in on the map. The Golden Willow Inn. I knew the place. Low profile, discreet, the kind of spot people used when they wanted to keep their meetings private. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering. This was it. Proof that couldn't be explained away. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. I wasn't sure what I planned to do: confront her in the act, watch from a distance. All I knew was that I needed to see it with my own eyes. The drive to the hotel felt both endless and too short. My mind raced with images of Keith wrapped in another man's arms, Herman's arms, and the anger inside me burned hotter with every mile. When I pulled into the parking lot, my headlights swept across a familiar car, Keith's. It sat near the far end of the lot, tucked beneath the shadow of a flickering street lamp. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every muscle in my body screamed to march inside and tear apart whatever twisted moment was happening behind those walls. But I forced myself to wait. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. At 11:22 p.m., the lobby doors swung open. My breath caught as I watched two figures step into the night. Keith, her hand brushing against the arm of the man beside her. Herman, their laughter drifted faintly through the air, casual and intimate, as if they had no idea their world was about to collapse. Keith's gaze flicked toward her car, but her eyes slid right past me, never noticing my car parked in the shadows. I stayed frozen as they stood beside her vehicle, talking softly. Then, without hesitation, Herman leaned in and kissed her. Not a quick peck, a slow, lingering kiss that made my stomach turn. Keith didn't pull away. She melted into him, her fingers curling against his chest. I gripped the steering wheel until my fingers ached, forcing myself to breathe through the tidal wave of fury crashing through my veins. They finally pulled apart, their whispered conversation too faint to hear. Moments later, Herman walked to his own car while Keith climbed into hers. The parking lot fell silent once more. As Keith drove away, unaware of the eyes that had just witnessed her betrayal, I sat motionless, pulse thudding in my ears. The image of that kiss burned into my mind. There was no denying it now. I had everything I needed. Proof of the affair, the lies, the deception that had poisoned our marriage. Now came the hardest part, confronting her face to face, and this time, there would be no escape. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, staring at the photos I'd taken the night before. Keith moved around the kitchen like nothing had happened, humming softly as she poured coffee. The sound grated against my nerves. "Sleep well?" she asked, glancing at me with a smile. I set my phone down, screen facing up. The photo of her kissing Herman glared back at her, the mug slipped from her fingers, shattering against the tile. "Care to explain?" My voice was low, steady, but my chest burned with anger. Her face paled. "Elliot, it's not what you think. Don't insult me with lies." I stood, each word clipped. "How long has it been going on?" Tears welled in her eyes, crocodile tears. I knew. It was a mistake. "Just once, don't." I stepped closer, eyes locked on hers. "I know everything. The texts. The hotel. The kitchen." Her lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time, she looked truly afraid. I took a breath, forcing down the whirlwind of emotions. "We're not done talking. But right now, I need space." Without another word, I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, leaving her standing amidst the shattered pieces of her lie. I drove aimlessly, gripping the wheel as my mind raced. Keith's face, that moment of shock and fear, replayed over and over. Part of me wanted to turn back, to scream, to demand why. But what good would it do? I already knew the answer: selfishness, lust, betrayal. Hours later, I returned home. The house was eerily quiet. The boys were upstairs, and Keith sat at the kitchen table, eyes red and puffy. She looked up as I entered, her lips parting as if to speak, but I raised a hand, not in front of the kids. My voice was calm, though every nerve in my body burned. "We'll talk after they're asleep." Dinner was a strained affair. Keith forced smiles for the boys, but her hands trembled as she passed the plates. I could barely swallow a bite. Every glance, every word felt like a lie woven into our daily routine. Once the boys were tucked in, I found her waiting in the living room. The air between us crackled with unspoken words. "Start talking," I said, folding my arms. Her shoulders sagged. It wasn't supposed to happen. Herman, he was there when I felt alone. One night turned into months. I cut in. And in our home. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they did nothing to soften the ache in my chest. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "Then why did you?" My voice cracked, but I held firm. "Why him? Of all people, why Herman?" She looked away, silent. And in that moment, I realized I might never get the answer I needed. That I took a step back, the distance between us feeling like a chasm that could never be bridged. "I don't know if I can forgive this, Keith. I don't know if I want to." Her breath hitched, but I turned and walked upstairs, leaving her in the suffocating silence of her own choices. The days that followed were a blur of tension and unspoken words. Keith tiptoed around me, her smiles forced and her attempts at conversation falling flat. At night, we slept on opposite sides of the bed, if you could call what I did sleep. One evening, I came home late from work, hoping to delay the inevitable confrontation waiting for me. As I stepped inside, I heard Keith on the phone in the kitchen. "No, he hasn't decided yet." "I don't know, Herman. Just give me time." "I know, I miss you too." My pulse spiked. She hadn't stopped. Even after being caught, she was still in contact with him. That I stepped into the doorway, making my presence known. Keith spun around, eyes wide with guilt. She fumbled to end the call, but the damage was done. "Still talking to him?" My voice was low, but the anger beneath it was undeniable. "It's not what you think," she stammered, stepping closer. "Don't. Just don't." I held up a hand, my heart hammering in my chest. "You had a chance to come clean. To end it. But you chose to keep going." "Elliot, please." "No." My voice cracked, but I stood my ground. "I deserve better than this. Our sons deserve better than this." Her breath hitched, tears welling in her eyes. But I was past the point of sympathy. The lies, the deceit, the betrayal, it was all too much. Without another word, I walked upstairs, the sound of Keith's muffled sobs fading behind me. Each step felt like one more nail in the coffin of a marriage I no longer recognized. The next morning, Keith tried again. She cornered me in the hallway as I buttoned my shirt, her eyes swollen from a night of crying. "Elliot, please, just listen. I've listened enough." My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. "You lied. Even after I found out, you still lied. How am I supposed to believe anything you say now?" Her lips trembled. "I made a mistake." "No, Keith. A mistake is a one-time thing. What you did, what you keep doing, that's a choice." Her breath hitched, but before she could respond, our oldest son peeked around the corner. "Mom? Dad? Why are you yelling?" We both froze. Keith quickly wiped her face, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's nothing, sweetie. Go get your shoes on, okay?" He hesitated, glancing between us before disappearing down the hall. The moment he was gone, I stepped past Keith, grabbing my keys from the hook. "We'll talk tonight," I said without looking back, but as I closed the door behind me, a knot of dread twisted in my stomach. I knew deep down I was running out of things to say, and soon, I'd have to decide whether this marriage was worth saving, or if it was already too far gone. That night, after the boys were in bed, Keith and I sat across from each other in the living room. The air between us felt heavy, suffocating. Neither of us spoke at first. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the next room. Finally, I broke the silence. "Why?" My voice came out rough, strained with the weight of everything I'd been holding back. "Why him, Keith? Why Herman?" She inhaled sharply, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. I don't know. It just, don't you dare say it, just happened," I cut in, my chest tightening. You don't accidentally fall into bed with someone. And you definitely don't keep doing it for months. Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. Not anymore. I was lonely, Elliot. You were always busy with work. I felt invisible in my own home. Her voice wavered, but the words hit me like a slap. Don't you dare try to blame this on me. My voice cracked as the anger rose to the surface. I worked to provide for this family for you and the boys. I trusted you. And you threw it all away. With him. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I stood abruptly, pacing the room as my pulse pounded in my ears. Do you even realize what you've done? What this will do to our kids if they find out? How do I explain to them that their mother? I stopped short, unable to finish the sentence. My breath came in ragged gasps as I tried to hold myself together. I never meant for it to get this far, she whispered, her voice barely audible, but it did. I shot back, turning to face her. And you didn't stop. Even after I confronted you. Even after I gave you a chance to come clean. I was scared, she admitted. I thought if I told the truth, I'd lose everything you already have. The words echoed in the room, the raw truth hanging in the air. You didn't just cheat, Keith. You betrayed me. You betrayed our family. And you did it with someone we trusted, someone who should have been off limits. Her shoulders shook as silent sobs racked her body. But all I could feel was the cold weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. I don't know if I can forgive this, I said, my voice hoarse with emotion. I don't know if I want to. She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face etched with regret. Please, Elliot. Don't throw away everything we've built. I shook my head, stepping back as if distance could dull the ache in my heart. You're the one who threw it away, I said softly. I'm just picking up the pieces. Silence fell between us once more, but this time, it felt final. Like the last thread holding us together had finally snapped. As I walked away, Keith's sobs echoed in the room behind me. But I didn't turn back. I couldn't. The next few days were a slow-motion car crash, one you see coming but can't stop. Every moment in that house was suffocating, thick with words neither of us could say in front of the boys. We moved around each other like strangers, every glance weighted with unspoken accusations and guilt. But the worst was yet to come. Saturday morning, I woke to the sound of Keith's phone vibrating on the nightstand. She was still asleep beside me, her back turned. The familiar pang of dread tightened in my chest. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. Point one glance at the screen, and my blood ran cold. A message from Herman. Can't stop thinking about last time. You taste so good. When can we meet again? I shot out of bed, the phone clenched in my hand. My pulse thundered in my ears as I read the words over and over. Even after everything, after she swore it was over, she was still lying. Still sneaking around, Keith. My voice was sharp enough to cut through the air. She stirred, eyes blinking open. What? I held up the phone, the screen glowing with her betrayal. Explain. Now. Her face paled instantly. Elliot, don't lie to me. The shout erupted from my chest before I could stop it. I didn't care anymore if the boys heard. The dam had finally broken. Keith sat up, scrambling to grab the phone, but I jerked it away. How long, Keith? How long have you been seeing him since I confronted you? Her breath hitched, tears already welling in her eyes. Please, I can explain. Explain what? My voice cracked, but the fury kept me standing. That you've been sneaking around with your own stepbrother behind my back. That you've lied to my face, to our kids, to everyone. It's not that simple, she cried, voice breaking. Yes, it is. I shouted. You had a choice, Keith. You could have stopped. You could have tried to fix this family. But you didn't. You chose him. Over me. Over our sons. Over everything. Tears streamed down her face, but I couldn't stop. The floodgates had burst, and there was no holding back the storm inside me. Do you have any idea what this has done to me? The nights I've laid awake, wondering if I wasn't enough if I somehow drove you into his arms? The way I've had to smile and pretend everything's fine for the boys while you've been sneaking off to hotel rooms and God knows where else? Keith buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. But I was past the point of sympathy, and Herman, my voice caught on his name. How could you do this with him? Someone we trusted. Someone who sat at our dinner table. Who played with our sons. My voice broke, raw and ragged. You've destroyed everything. I never wanted to hurt you, she sobbed. Then why didn't you stop? The room fell into a suffocating silence, broken only by the sound of Keith's ragged breathing. My chest heaved as I fought to rein in the whirlwind of emotions, but the anger still burned beneath my skin. Finally, I spoke again, my voice quieter but no less firm. This marriage is over. Keith's head snapped up, eyes wide with shock. No, Elliot, please. Don't do this. Think of the boys. I am thinking of them, I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. They deserve better than this. Better than a family built on lies. And I deserve better, too. She reached for me, but I stepped back. The distance between us felt like a chasm that could never be crossed. I'll stay until we figure out the logistics, I said, each word like a stone in my throat. But I'm filing for divorce. Elliot, please, no. My gaze met hers, unflinching. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind the shattered remains of a life that could never be put back together. The days following my decision to divorce Keith were a blur of tense conversations, whispered explanations to the boys, and sleepless nights spent staring at the ceiling. The weight of everything that had happened clung to me like a heavy coat I couldn't take off. Keith clung to hope, though. Every day, she tried to talk to me, to convince me that we could fix this, salvage what was left of our marriage. But I couldn't forget the texts, the lies, or the image of her with Herman. One evening, after the boys were in bed, she cornered me in the living room again. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hands trembling as she clutched a glass of wine. Elliot, please, can we just talk? I stood by the window, staring at the darkened street outside. My voice was hollow when I answered. Talk about what, Keith? How you lied to my face for months. How you kept seeing him even after I found out. I was scared, she whispered. Scared of losing you, losing our family. You lost us the moment you chose him, I shot back, turning to face her. Don't act like this was a mistake. You knew exactly what you were doing. Tears welled in her eyes, but they no longer stirred any sympathy in me. I had given her chances, opportunities to come clean, to stop, but she hadn't. Does Herman know? I asked, my voice low. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The hesitation was enough. I laughed bitterly. Of course he does. Did you two plan on riding off into the sunset together? Or was he just a convenient escape from your lonely marriage? Stop it, she snapped, the glass in her hand shaking. You don't know what it's like to feel invisible, like you're nothing more than a wife and mother, forgotten by the man who promised to love you, and that justifies sleeping with your stepbrother? I cut her off. Don't twist this into something it's not, Keith. I worked long hours to give you and the boys a good life. I trusted you. I never once doubted your loyalty until you gave me a reason to. Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, she looked genuinely broken. But it was too late. Whatever love we'd once shared had been shattered beyond repair. Have you told him it's over? I asked after a long pause. She nodded, wiping at her eyes. Yes. I told him it had to stop. I haven't seen him since. I studied her carefully. I hope that's true. Because if I ever catch him near this house or our boys, there'll be hell to pay. Her gaze dropped to the floor, and silence settled between us like a heavy fog. I knew then that this chapter of our lives was coming to an end. I'll start looking for a place tomorrow, I said finally. We'll figure out custody once I've moved out. Keith's breath hitched as she stepped closer, her hand reaching for mine. Elliot, don't do this. Please. I love you. I pulled my hand away. If you loved me, none of this would have happened. Without another word, I turned and walked upstairs, leaving her standing in the silence of her own regrets. Packing my things felt surreal. Each item I placed into boxes carried memories, some good, some tainted by betrayal. Keith hovered nearby, watching in silence, her eyes pleading for a second chance I couldn't give. The boys didn't fully understand. Our oldest, sensing the tension, asked if I'd be back. I knelt beside him, heart heavy. I'll always be here for you and your brother. No matter what. His hug nearly broke me. When it was time to leave, Keith stood by the door, tears streaming down her face. Elliot, please don't go. I paused, gripping the suitcase handle tighter. I have to. For my sake, and the boys. Without another word, I stepped outside, the weight of a broken marriage pressing down with every step. As the door clicked shut behind me, I knew there was no turning back. The first week alone in my new apartment was a blur of silence and sleepless nights. The absence of my boys' laughter echoed in the empty rooms, a constant reminder of what I'd lost. Yet, despite the ache in my chest, I knew I'd made the right choice. Keith texted often, short messages asking if I was okay, sometimes begging for another chance. I rarely replied. The damage was too deep, the trust too shattered. Co-parenting became our new reality. Dropping the boys off at Keith's house was the hardest part. Each time, seeing her standing in the doorway stirred a mixture of anger, regret, and something I couldn't quite name. Yet, I kept my composure for the boys' sake. One evening, as I buckled my youngest into his car seat, he looked up at me with wide eyes. Dad, are you ever gonna come home again? I swallowed the lump in my throat. This is my home now, buddy. But I'll always be close by. And we'll have so much fun when you visit. He nodded slowly, as if trying to understand a world that no longer made sense. His innocence was a stark reminder of why I had to stay strong, why I couldn't let Keith's choices define the future for any of us. As I drove away that night, my gaze flicked to the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the home I'd left behind. But instead of regret, I felt something unexpected, hope. The past was behind me. Now, it was time to rebuild, not for Keith, not for revenge, but for myself and the two boys who needed me to be whole again. Months passed. The cold grip of betrayal loosened bit by bit, though its shadow still lingered in the quiet moments. The anger that had once consumed me slowly dulled into something more manageable, less like a wildfire and more like an ache that flared up when I least expected it. But I learned to live with it. You have to. Keith and I settled into a co-parenting routine that worked, though our interactions remained strained. We exchanged polite words during pickups and drop-offs, but the warmth that had once existed between us was gone, replaced by something colder, more distant. I no longer searched her eyes for answers. I no longer wondered why. I'd accepted the fact that I might never understand her choices, and that was okay. One evening, after dropping the boys off at her house, I lingered in the driveway for a moment longer than usual. Through the window, I could see Keith helping our youngest with his shoes, her smile soft but tired. There was a time when that sight would have twisted something deep inside me: resentment, grief, longing for what could have been. But tonight, all I felt was a quiet kind of acceptance. Driving back to my apartment, the familiar streets blurred past, each turn bringing me closer to the life I was still learning to navigate. The apartment itself was simple: 2 bedrooms, minimal furniture, walls bare except for a few framed photos of the boys. It wasn't much, but it was mine. A place untouched by lies or broken promises. After putting the boys to bed that night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the faint reflection of my own face in the darkened window. Memories flickered through my mind, good ones and bad, moments of laughter mixed with the sting of betrayal. And yet, for the first time in a long time, the weight of those memories didn't feel quite so heavy. A faint knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Frowning, I crossed the room and opened it to find Keith standing there, her coat pulled tightly around her shoulders against the chill of the night. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. That I hesitated. "Keith, it's late, please," she interrupted, her eyes searching mine. "Just 5 minutes." Stepping aside, I let her in. She moved hesitantly, as though unsure of her place in this space that wasn't ours. I motioned for her to sit at the table, but she remained standing, arms wrapped tightly around herself. "I know I'm the last person you want to see right now," she began, her voice low and strained. "And I know I've lost any right to ask anything of you. But I needed to say this face to face." She took a shaky breath. "I'm sorry, Elliot. For everything. I know that doesn't fix what I did or erase the pain I caused you and the boys, but I need you to know that I regret it. Every day." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of too many broken promises. "I'm not saying this because I expect forgiveness or because I think we can go back to the way things were. I know we can't. I needed to say it. For both our sakes." I studied her in the dim light, searching her face for the lies I'd grown so used to. But this time, I found none. Just sorrow. Regret. And maybe, somewhere deep beneath it all, the woman I had once loved. For a moment, I considered what my life might have been if none of this had happened, if the late nights, the secret texts, and the lies had never existed. But clinging to that, what if, would only keep me trapped in the past. "Thank you for saying that," I replied finally, my voice steady. "But you're right, sorry doesn't erase what happened. And it doesn't change the fact that I had to rebuild my life from the ground up because of your choices." "I know," she whispered. I wanted to give you some kind of closure." Closure. The word echoed in my mind. Maybe that was what I needed. Not answers. Not explanations. Just an ending that felt complete. That I nodded slowly. "I hope you find peace, Keith. For your sake. And for the boys. But I can't hold on to the past anymore. I need to move forward for myself and for them." Her breath hitched, but she managed a nod. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the door. As it closed softly behind her, the silence that followed felt different, lighter, somehow. That I stood there for a long moment, letting the stillness settle around me like a final chapter closing. The pain of betrayal would never fully disappear, I knew that. But tonight, it felt a little easier to breathe. Turning back toward the kitchen, I caught sight of the framed photo on the counter, the one of me and the boys, their faces bright with laughter. For the first time in months, I smiled. That I wasn't defined by what Keith had done. I wasn't trapped by the past or the scars it left behind. That I was a father. A survivor. And, finally, a man ready to start again.